mechanic's spanner slipped from his hand, clattering against the concrete floor as the sound of raised voices cut through the hangar. A test pilot was pacing beneath the nose of the new machine, his gloved hands trembling with anger. "I'm not taking that thing up again," he barked. "Not unless you want to scrape me off the runway." It was April 1942, and the Bell assembly plant in Buffalo was running hot enough to melt nerves. Engines thundered on test stands, rivet guns rattled like machine guns, and the smell of oil and aluminum hung in the air. America was desperate for fighters, any fighters. But the men building this one had begun to wonder if they were crafting a weapon or a coffin with wings. The aircraft gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its olive drab skin smooth as glass, its long nose pointing forward like a predator ready to strike. The engineers called it innovation. The pilots called it suicide. On paper, it was revolutionary. A 37mm cannon firing through the propeller hub, tricycle landing gear for perfect balance, and a streamlined mid-engine layout that looked more like a dream car than a warplane. But behind that beauty was something terrifying. The engine, shoved behind the pilot's seat to balance weight, sent power forward through a narrow steel shaft running beneath the cockpit floor. At full throttle, that shaft screamed like a live wire, a vibrating, spinning reminder that death was inches below your feet. And when the bearings gave out, as they often did, that same shaft could snap loose like a blade. One test pilot described it best. "You didn't fly the Airacobra. You prayed it didn't kill you before takeoff." Outside, spring snow melted into the factory drains as mechanics wiped oil from their hands and avoided each other's eyes. Bell aircraft was supposed to be the future, the symbol of America's engineering promise. Instead, it was producing a machine the Air Corps didn't trust and the Allies no longer wanted. British pilots had tested it and quietly sent their reports back. Unstable, unsafe, unsuited for combat. The French had ordered hundreds, but never received them before the fall of Paris. Even the Americans were quietly transferring to safer aircraft, anything with the engine in front where it belonged. And yet, deep down, no one could let go of the dream. The designers swore they could fix it. The factory crews kept working double shifts, telling themselves that every rivet might change the tide of war. Somewhere inside that flawed machine, they believed a great fighter was trying to break free. Before we dive into what became of this strange, misunderstood aircraft, and how it found redemption in the unlikeliest skies, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Have you ever heard of the P-39's second life over the Eastern Front? Drop a comment below. And if you enjoy these deep dives into the hidden corners of aviation history, hit subscribe and join the crew. Because the story of this failed fighter is only just beginning. Senior Lieutenant Grigory Rechkalov was among the first Soviet pilots to take the American fighter into combat. His report, written in the autumn of 1942, was short but telling. "The machine is heavy but solid. It does not climb well, but it dives like a stone. The cannon is magnificent. Today I destroyed a Junkers Ju-88 with 3 shells. The entire tail section separated from the fuselage. This aircraft rewards aggression and punishes hesitation." That final sentence would come to define the Airacobra's legacy on the Eastern Front. Aggression rewarded, hesitation punished. Soviet pilots quickly realized that this was not an aircraft to be flown timidly. It was a brawler, a low-altitude knife fighter that demanded precision, speed, and nerve. To master it was to walk a thin line between triumph and catastrophe. And no one walked that line better than Alexander Ivanovich Pokrishkin. Born in 1913 in Novonikolayevsk, Pokrishkin began the war flying the outdated MiG-3, a fast but fragile interceptor ill-suited for the brutal air duels of 1941. He survived on instinct, mastering the fundamentals of aerial combat through trial, error, and sheer will. When he transitioned to the P-39 in early 1943, it was as if fate had matched man to machine. Where others saw flaws, Pokrishkin saw opportunity. He realized that the Airacobra's strengths, its stability, its firepower, and its power at low altitude, could be combined into a new kind of fighting doctrine. He called it his formula for air combat. Pokrishkin's formula wasn't a single maneuver, but a complete tactical system. He taught his pilots to control altitude and energy as weapons, not just conditions. His unit would patrol at medium altitude, around 15,000 feet, waiting until German formations appeared below. Then they would dive, using gravity and speed to close the gap in seconds, fire a short, brutal burst from the 37mm cannon, and pull sharply up before the enemy could react. It was clean, efficient, and devastating. The Airacobra's weaknesses vanished when flown this way. It didn't need to chase at altitude or sustain long dogfights. It struck hard and disappeared, like a predator striking from the trees. The results came quickly. Pokrishkin's score climbed from 5 kills to 10, then 20. By mid-1943, during the Battle of Kursk, he was the Soviet Union's leading ace. His regiment, flying American-built Airacobras, had become one of the most feared units on the Eastern Front. German pilots began to recognize his presence on the radio. Whenever his call sign, Zotka, was heard, the warning echoed across Luftwaffe frequencies. Achtung! Pokrishkin in der Luft. Beware! Pokrishkin is in the air. The Battle of Kursk became the crucible where the P-39's reputation was forged. The largest tank battle in history raged below, while above, thousands of aircraft clashed in chaotic low-level combat. In the thick haze of dust and smoke, the Airacobra's strengths became undeniable. Its heavy nose cannon tore through bombers and tanks alike. Its sturdy frame could survive hits that shattered other fighters. And its low-altitude acceleration gave Soviet pilots the initiative, the power to strike first, vanish, and strike again. Pokrishkin's leadership transformed the 16th Guards Fighter Regiment into an elite air hunting unit. He enforced strict discipline and methodical teamwork, insisting that no pilot chase kills or break formation. Every engagement was planned, executed, and reviewed. He treated air combat like engineering, a science with measurable outcomes. Reshaped, Pokrishkin's wingman and sometimes rival, followed the same creed. Together, they and their comrades used the Airacobra to devastating effect, sweeping the skies clean over Kuban, Oral, and Kursk. Between them, Pokrishkin and Reshaped would claim over 100 confirmed kills, almost all while flying an aircraft their own. Allies had dismissed as a failure, even Soviet. Engineers were surprised by how well the P-39 held up. Its Allison engine performed flawlessly in the cold. Its tricycle gear handled mud and snow with ease. And its armament, that single monstrous cannon, remained unmatched in the war for raw destructive power. By 1944, Pokrishkin had achieved 59 confirmed victories, becoming the first Allied pilot to receive the title Hero of the Soviet Union 3 times. He credited his success not to talent but to discipline, and to the machine that allowed him to fight the war on his own terms. When asked why he preferred the Airacobra over Soviet designs, he reportedly smiled and said, "It has one great advantage and it forgives no mistakes." To the Americans, the P-39 was a flawed experiment. To the Soviets, it became a legend. In their hands, it was not just an aircraft but a philosophy. Adapt, innovate, and turn limitation into strength. By war's end, nearly 5,000 Airacobras had served in Soviet squadrons. Most were worn out, grounded, or cannibalized for parts. But for a brief burning moment they had ruled the skies, proof that the value of a machine lies not in its design, but in the skill and vision of those who fly it. By the summer of 1943, the Luftwaffe had deployed its finest squadrons to the Eastern Front. They expected another swift campaign, air superiority gained through experience, discipline, and superior machinery. But what they found instead were Soviet regiments flying American-built Bell P-39 Airacobras, commanded by pilots who had turned the aircraft's perceived flaws into lethal advantages. In the skies above Kursk, the results were immediate. Soviet formations operating in coordinated packs descended on German bomber groups with precision. Within the first week of combat, Pokrishkin's 16th Guards Fighter Regiment claimed over 100 confirmed kills. His personal tally for July alone reached 23. Luftwaffe radio intercepts spoke of unseen attackers that appeared from the clouds, struck once, and vanished before escort fighters could react. The P-39's 37mm nose cannon, originally designed for intercepting high-altitude bombers, found a new purpose in the east. It tore apart Stuka dive bombers and shattered armored columns crawling across the Russian steppe. The same aircraft that American pilots had dismissed as sluggish and unstable became a tool of surgical destruction when flown the Soviet way. Low, fast, and furious. Reports of these victories began filtering back to Washington and London. American intelligence analysts were puzzled, even skeptical. The P-39 had been considered a dead-end design, an experiment that had failed to meet modern air combat standards. Yet by late 1943, Soviet communique described it as one of the most effective fighters in frontline service. At first, many dismissed these reports as propaganda, a convenient way for Moscow to flatter its Lend-Lease allies. But the evidence kept growing. Reconnaissance photos confirmed Airacobras dominating low altitude. When Clarence Kelly Johnson at Lockheed began designing the P-80 Shooting Star in 1943, he was working at the cutting edge of aviation. It would become America's first operational jet fighter, sleek, powerful, and fast enough to break new boundaries of flight. Yet for all its modernity, Johnson's design carried unmistakable echoes of an earlier, more controversial aircraft, the Bell P-39 Airacobra. Both featured tricycle landing gear for better ground handling and stability. Both prioritized pilot visibility through a raised cockpit and clean forward view. And both placed their engines behind the pilot, a radical concept first tested, refined, and nearly ruined by the P-39's mixed legacy. The Shooting Star was, in a sense, the Airacobra reborn, a perfected version of ideas once dismissed as mistakes. The connection between these two aircraft was not coincidence. It was evolution, shaped by bitter experience and the painful lessons of war. The P-39's shortcomings forced American engineers to confront weaknesses in engine supercharging, high-altitude performance, and aerodynamic stability. Its surprising success in Soviet hands taught a second equally vital truth, that performance could not be judged in isolation. A weapon's value depended on how it was used, by whom, and where. In the East, the Airacobra became a symbol of defiance. Alexander Pokrishkin, the Soviet ace who had mastered it, ended the war with 59 confirmed victories, all achieved in American-built fighters. His record made him the second highest-scoring Allied ace of the war, surpassed only by his comrade Ivan Kozhedub. Pokrishkin was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union 3 times, a rare distinction reserved for only the most extraordinary service. In his post-war memoirs, Pokrishkin described the Airacobra as a teacher more than a tool. He wrote, "It punished hesitation, rewarded precision, and taught me to fly as if every second mattered." For a man who survived hundreds of combat sorties, it was not mere sentiment. It was a declaration of respect for an aircraft that, while imperfect, had given him mastery of the air. By the war's end, more than 4,700 P-39s had been delivered to the Soviet Union, nearly half of all Airacobras ever built. They fought from the ruins of Stalingrad to the outskirts of Berlin, claiming thousands of victories. These were the same aircraft American pilots had abandoned as obsolete and dangerous, the same flying coffins that had been ridiculed in Allied training fields. Yet on the Eastern Front, they became instruments of survival, power, and redemption. The production lines in Buffalo, New York, continued until August 1944. By the time they shut down, Bell Aircraft had produced 9,584 P-39s in multiple variants. Most of the factory workers who built them never knew their true legacy. They had read the dismissive reports from American test pilots, heard the jokes about coffins with wings, and believed they were building failures. What they could not have imagined was that, halfway across the world, those same machines were helping the Red Air Force blunt the most powerful military offensive in history. When the war ended and the jet age began, the P-39 faded from view. By 1950, it had vanished from active service. Most were melted down for scrap, their aluminum repurposed for cars, construction, or new aircraft. A few survived in museums, silent relics of an era that had already passed into legend. But its influence remained embedded in every American jet that followed. The Airacobra's failures were not the end of its story. They were the groundwork for progress. Its tricycle landing gear became standard on nearly all post-war fighters. Its mid-engine design, once controversial, paved the way for centralized weight distribution that improved balance and maneuverability. Its car door-style cockpit, awkward but innovative, evolved into the bubble canopies that would define jet fighters for the next 3 decades. Most importantly, the P-39 forced a philosophical shift. Engineers and tacticians alike learned that a design's brilliance could only be measured by context. What failed in one theater might excel in another. What seemed clumsy in theory could prove perfect in practice. The Airacobra was not a mistake, it was a mirror. reflecting how perspective and purpose could transform defeat into success. Today, the few surviving P-39s rest quietly in hangars beside Mustangs and Thunderbolts, their faded paint still bearing Soviet stars. Museum placards describe them as an unsuccessful American fighter that achieved remarkable success in Soviet hands. It's a fair summary, but not a full one, because the P-39 story is not just about performance statistics or kill counts. It is about persistence. From the designers who refused to abandon their radical ideas, to the workers who built each aircraft with care despite knowing it was unwanted, to the foreign pilots who turned an unwanted gift into a weapon of legend. In the end, the Airacobra became something larger than its flaws. It became proof that progress often hides inside failure, that even rejected ideas can carry the seeds of future greatness. And when the F-86 Sabre roared into the sky in 1947, dominating the dawn of the jet age, it did so with the DNA of the despised P-39 running through its frame, a quiet testament to an aircraft that nobody wanted, but history could never forget. The legacy of the P-39 Airacobra is not measured in the victories it claimed or the headlines it failed to make, but in the transformation it inspired. What began as a misunderstood experiment, a fighter too heavy, too unorthodox, and too far ahead of its time, became the unlikely teacher of an entire generation of engineers and pilots. Every misstep in its design revealed truths that textbooks never could. Every rejection became a reminder that progress is born from persistence, not perfection. The Soviets, who received it as an afterthought, proved that context defines success. In their hands, the Airacobra wasn't a failure. It was a weapon of survival, a lifeline in the frozen skies above Kursk and Stalingrad. The same cockpit American pilots dismissed as claustrophobic became the command seat of some of the most skilled aces of the Eastern Front. The difference wasn't the machine. It was the mission. When the jet age dawned, the DNA of the P-39 lived on. Its central engine placement informed new ideas about aerodynamics. Its emphasis on stability and pilot control reappeared in the F-80, the F-86, and every generation that followed. What was once a flying coffin had quietly laid the groundwork for American air superiority. The Airacobra's story is a quiet defiance against easy conclusions. It reminds us that history's failures are often tomorrow's foundations, that rejection, when examined honestly, becomes revelation. The P-39 may never have ruled the skies, but it shaped those who would, and that perhaps is the truest form of victory.